Hi, my name is Elsa. And the reason I wanted to bring this interview series into the world is because I have spasmodic dysphonia, like many of you who are watching, or maybe you're watching this because you have a loved one that has SD and you want to understand more about their condition. And so it was put on my heart to do this interview series with friends of mine in the spasmodic dysphonia community as a way to share with others and to mostly encourage people. At, especially in the beginning of a diagnosis, we can feel very discouraged and defeated by SD, but many of the people in my interview series have had SD for a very long time. And so my hope in them sharing their story is that you will be encouraged and you will find hope. So today I am excited to introduce my friend Ninian Beall, who is part of my local SD community. Ninian, welcome to the interview.
Thank you, Elsa.
So Ninian, I know you don't live here in Charlotte. Can you tell us where you're based out of?
I live in Durham, North Carolina, which is sort of in the central part of the state, the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill area. And I've actually lived here or close to here for I think about 55 years.
Okay. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Edgewater, Maryland, which is very close to Annapolis, the capital, probably 3 or 4 miles south of Annapolis, on the beautiful South River, which is an estuary of the Chesapeake Bay on the western side of the bay.
I'm actually familiar with that part of the world because I grew up in Baltimore and we would go over to Annapolis in that area when I was a child. Beautiful.
Yes, it is.
And so what was your life like as a child? Tell me, what was it like growing up in that area?
Well, we lived on the river, essentially. There was some community property between our house and the river, but we could see the river. There's a community pier where we kept our boat. My father and mother had a very nice 21-foot Owens cabin cruiser, which we used to use in the summertime. I learned how to swim right there. The hazard was a jellyfish that came in about 4th of July and would sting you if you weren't careful. It was a good childhood. You know, I had really caring parents. I'm the oldest of 5 children. It was pretty restrained, you might say. We were Presbyterians. So I'd say it was a strict upbringing, but, you know, a loving upbringing, and I took away a lot of good things from it.
Wonderful. And so when did you start feeling symptoms of SD? Was this when you're youth or as you progressed into adulthood?
No, I was, you know, quite a bit older. I noticed it when I was age 51. And I remember when it was because I was planning to go to music camp, an old time string band music camp in Swannanoa, North Carolina. And I had signed up for a singing class. And I realized a couple of weeks before the camp was to start that I was having trouble, you know, speaking. And you know, after several days, I mean, after enough time went by that I knew it wasn't that I had a cold, I contacted the instructor for the class to explain what had happened and to ask her if she thought I should still come to the class. Um, and she said I should, and I'm really, grateful for that because I think singing has been a helpful thing for me with spasmodic dysphonia.
And how long did it take you to get diagnosed once all that, you said you started to get the symptoms, but when did you find out it was SD?
It was very quickly. I don't remember exactly, but certainly by the end of that summer, and it was in early July that I started to experience the symptoms. Um, and I think I went to my general practitioner and that he suspected it. So I was very lucky, to have a doctor who knew about it. And he referred me to a clinic at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill Hospital, where they've got some experts in SD. So I was lucky in that respect.
Absolutely. I know when I got diagnosed in 2012, I had already lived with it for 2 years, and people were telling me it was all in my head, and it was psychosomatic, and it was stress and acid reflux. Oh, that was very lucky that
It
you had
was,
that experience.
yeah.
And then what was it like for you emotionally once you knew there was a name and this was a condition, and if it was like me, you found out that there's no cure? What was that all like for you?
Well, I went on, I guess I took it on as a project to learn as much about SD's causes and available treatments as I could. So as far as what my emotional reaction was, as I said, I found out pretty quickly what it was. So I think that probably made it, easier to deal with in the beginning. Uh, but I just started doing a lot of research and trying to figure out what, if anything, I was going to do just in terms of a treatment. I looked into Botox, uh, decided I really didn't want to do that. Read some stuff by Dr. Morton Cooper. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a doctor from California who, back at that time, this was 1998, um, he was advertising himself as the voice doctor to the stars and had a theory that spasmodic dysphonia was not neurological and that it was something that you could cure by voice training. So his book was pretty controversial, as you can imagine, and he was, vocally, made statements opposing some of the chief researchers on SD at that time. But I read his stuff, and I think I did get some pointers from it, and so that was and then I went to a couple of national conferences, SD conferences. I guess I started the SD support group in Durham. We never had a large membership. I think maybe 5 people was the most that we had, but that was really useful, in the beginning, and only 2 of the people who were in the group are still around, and we don't meet. We, very occasionally, talk, but so that group, I don't remember how long that went on, maybe a couple of years, something like that.
Okay, so you were 51 when you got diagnosed. I imagine you were still working professionally, still very active in your life. And I know for me, when I was diagnosed at, I think I was 35 or 36, it really impacted me from a professional standpoint and my ability to perform my job. Tell us what that was like for you from a professional standpoint or from a social standpoint. How were you able to cope with all of that? And how did it affect you?
Well, that was difficult. Um, I was the manager of a vocational training program for adults with mental retardation and other developmental disabilities. And we were serving, it varied, but maybe 100 to 120 people at any given time. And we had a staff of 25 to 30 people, and I directly supervised 5 or 6 people, department heads, and we had weekly management team meetings that would last a couple hours that I chaired. And of course, there was, we were a business that was, we needed to solicit customers, and I wasn't the main person doing that, but sometimes I got involved in that. We also were associated with an area mental health program, which had its own bureaucracies, levels of bureaucracy that, I had a supervisor there and had to deal with a finance director. So it was difficult. That was difficult. Um, I one time I went in and I started talking to the staff like this to see if that would be acceptable. And they said, no, we'd rather hear your spasmodic dysphonia voice.
So were you just open with everybody? You said, listen, I've got this voice condition. I sound like this.
Right. And I wasn't, I guess, because I was in a position of relative power to everybody else who worked in that building, that probably gave me more confidence than if I had been at the bottom rung of the ladder. I might not have been so quickly so quick to reveal the situation to people, because I might have had some concern about my job. But I had a very supportive supervisor. I mean, he was very supportive in every way. I'd worked for, like, geez, let's see, by that time I probably worked for him for 15 years, and he was a good friend as well. So I had a very supportive professional situation, but the fact that I needed to use my voice in my job, made it difficult. Started using, luckily, it was just about the time that people were starting to get email. And so that was really lucky for me. I could use email to communicate even with people in the building. I would email the guy in the next door office sometimes. So that was a big plus, and of course allowed me to communicate with people outside in the business world that I needed to deal with, with email. So that was a big help. But it did ultimately lead me to, was one factor in me taking an early retirement. 5 years later, 5 years after, I got diagnosed. It was so even I could do my job, but still it was hard to do it, and it was very tiring. I found talking to be very tiring, and sometimes I would remember saying to people who maybe I was meeting for the first time or didn't know about my SD, I would say, I have this speech condition called spasmodic dysphonia. And if you have any difficulty understanding me, just ask me to repeat it, and I will. And often, especially after I'd gotten some practice with talking with SD, sometimes people would say, "Well, you sound fine. You don't, you don't seem to be having any problem." So, of course, that was good. But I guess the point I'm making is that you can appear to be functioning well to other people, and at the same time, it can be very difficult for you to do it. And I remember one of the therapists or speech pathologist at the University of North Carolina said, it takes people with SD about 4 times as much air to make a sound equivalent to one that a normal person, not that we're not normal people, but that a normal speaker would require. So that's a lot of extra lung work.
Well, that's very interesting to me because I feel the same when I speak, and I speak also for a living. I'm a health coach. And so I'll have sessions with people and I'll talk on the phone. And sometimes if I have clients like 3 in a row, I'll hang up and I'll be just spent. So that makes sense, what you're saying. And people usually, I'll say the same thing. If you don't understand me, just ask me to repeat. People are really quite gracious and kind, I found, which it seems like you found the same. But the thing that is so hard is getting people to understand it doesn't hurt. I'm just exhausted after a long day. And you get it.
Yes, I definitely get that. I definitely get that.
So something that I find very interesting about SD is that there is many more women that have this disorder than men. And I'm curious because, I met you through our local support group, our statewide support group, I should say. And I think you're maybe one of 3 men on our call. So I'm just curious what that's been like for you in a sea of many women. And when you've gone to the national conferences, what's that been like for you?
Well, I didn't realize that was the case until you just pointed it out. So I haven't, it's been a long time now since I've been involved in either a support group or gone to any conferences or workshops. But I don't remember noticing that or being particularly aware of it. Now that you mention it, I remember, Christy Ludlow being a prominent person at a lot of the conferences. I don't know if you know her, researcher and the speech, both of the speech pathologists that I worked with at University of North Carolina were women. But I don't remember. I'm used to working with a lot of women, having worked in the human services field. I've worked for anti-poverty agencies, mental health agencies, been a consultant to social service agencies. I'm very used to working with women professionals. That's mostly who I've been around.
So this was just more of the same for you, nothing out of the ordinary.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so you mentioned previously that when you learned about some of the therapies, which include vocal therapies and Botox, you weren't particularly interested in Botox. So I imagine you haven't had any Botox to date. Is that right?
That's right. I haven't. Yeah, I was, because I was interested in it, because that was I guess still is the current preeminent treatment. But the more I looked into it, the more it was unattractive, because I didn't like the idea of going through a cycle between shots of not being able to speak much at all for the first few days, and then getting into some acceptable voice for some period of time, and then noticing that your voice was starting to break up, and then, going through a period of deteriorating voice until you could get your next shot. That just didn't seem, I didn't want SD to be that big a part of my life. And another concern was that, even though I do believe it's safe, it seemed to me that getting a needle in your throat that many times, as a regular thing, might actually, perhaps through the formation of scar tissue, change the shape of your vocal cords, and perhaps make it impossible for you ever to regain your normal voice. So that's just something I made up, but the basic factor was, it seemed to be a roller coaster type of voice existence if you do Botox.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have had Botox several times, and I've had that thought when the needle goes in and the doctor has you speak while it's in there. It's quite unsettling. The results are good, but it's not for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it clearly wasn't for you. And actually, I hear you very good today. I know we have our good days and our bad days.
Yeah, I do have good days and bad days. But and I think, or other people have suggested that it's better in the summertime. So I could see how that might be. It might be the cold weather on your throat causes some tension that's not there in the summertime. But it's not something I've tried to document to see if I thought that was really true or not. But yeah, I think a main factor is keeping my stress level down. Luckily, I'm able to have a relatively stress-free life. I'm retired. I'm, financially secure, unless the stock market goes down and never comes back up. I've got Medicare. I have a loving partner, Donna, who lives here, and I live on a beautiful little lake. You can watch the water birds. So I'm and also back in 1991, I had neck surgery for a pinched nerve, and it wasn't really 100% effective. And I, to this day, still have pretty severe neck muscle spasms from time to time. And so back during my period of adjusting to that, I set it as a goal to keep my stress level as low as I could. And that's really helped me with the SD also.
Absolutely. And do you have anything you can share with us, like stress relievers, if you do ever feel the stress coming up, or any creative outlets that you kind of use regularly to help you with any stress that might creep in?
I have a little exercise I use sometimes. If I lie on my back and pretend that there is a stick down at the level of my toes, and that this stick or line gradually moves up my whole body, and I'm conscious of that happening at every second, where the line is and how I feel there, and eventually it goes up and to the top of my head, and I can either have it go back down or I can let it go out of the top of my head. And I used to do it always from the bottom up to the top and start over again. But fairly recently, I've realized that coming up and then going back down actually is going down is a different experience. The muscles do some different things to relax on my neck muscles in particular. On the way back down is on the way up. So that's something I kind of do as needed. And play, I play the banjo, so when you're playing a musical instrument, it pretty much takes your mind off of everything else.
And I love banjo playing. We got to hear that, and it's wonderful.
Thank you. I'm sure that's a stress reliever too, as well as being fun, especially when you get to play with other people.
Mm-hmm. But I also think your living conditions, as you mentioned, you live on the water, you've got a slower paced life, you're with a loving relationship partner, you have a lot of good things in your life. So I'm sure it all contributes to this.
Yeah, I'm sure it does too.
You're a lucky guy, let me tell you.
I am. I'm a really lucky guy. And I have a wonderful daughter, Megan, who's 43. She has 3 children. She and her husband live in Weston, Connecticut. So unfortunately, I'm not able to see them right now. But
yeah,
they're a big factor in my life.
Yeah,
emotionally, if not in person.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, and you just made me think we should share it with the people for the benefit of those that watch this later, that we're in the middle of a pandemic right now and we have to wear masks. And it's been like this for 7 months. I'm curious, what's that been like as far as needing to wear a mask and having to communicate? Because I know for me, it's so hard. I was just at Harris Teeter, our local grocery store, this morning trying to talk to some of the clerks, and when this is all covered up, they don't understand me.
I haven't had that problem. Maybe it's because of maybe it has to do with the pitch of our voices. Maybe it's easier for lower pitched voices to go through the cloth. I don't know, but I don't go out a lot. For sure. I don't have a lot of interactions with, people outside of my home and my next, immediate neighbors around here. But that, hasn't been a problem. I will say that one thing I do, and this doesn't have anything necessarily to do with the pandemic, but just as a general coping strategy, I avoid doing any kind of business transaction in person whenever I can. So whole years I think might have gone by that I never went into a bank. I just did all my business at the terminals. What do you call them?
The ATM machine.
ATMs. Yeah, so I do everything I possibly can at the ATMs, and same thing. Like I always pay for my gas at the pump. I don't go in and have to deal with the clerk inside. So I guess I reduce my need to talk as much as I can.
Mm-hmm. Good strategies. That's great. And kind of along that line of thinking, what are some of your SD pet peeves? Like for instance, for me, I cannot stand going up to a drive-through and having to speak and project. That's a pet peeve of mine. Do you have anything like that?
Well, I mean, the hardest thing, I guess, along those lines is talking on the telephone, especially if it's a business call. Mm-hmm. Or if it's anything other than a call with somebody who knows me, then that seems to automatically increase my, stress level to the point that it makes it difficult to talk. Um, I have noticed that one thing that helps with that is if I turn the speaker on my phone when I'm talking. So if I can hear myself, I can talk better. And I've done some experiments with that, with getting back when when I first got SD, I got a little speaker, or I set up a microphone that went into a little amp that I could then plug headphones into and talk, and I could talk to other people and at the same time hear myself. And I think this has the reason I thought to do this was way back, I used to be a disc jockey, and you wear headphones all the time. Uh, so you can hear, so essentially you can hear what's going out over the air. And I found that if I ever didn't wear the headphones, I really couldn't do the job. I couldn't, there was something about having those headphones on that gives you feedback almost instantly, but not quite, of course. But you could, if you could hear yourself the way everybody else hears you, then you could make adjustments to your voice as needed to make it sound better.
Absolutely.
So that's what made me think of trying that for SD, and it does work. And I still do that for every phone call I answer. First thing I do is punch the speaker button.
Yeah, I've been nodding my head since you started sharing that, because I discover I don't have the background as a disc jockey like you, but somehow I realized with the headsets, if I had a headset in, the AirPods that people wear, that if I could hear myself, especially in a loud place where it's hard to project, if I could hear myself, my speech was a little bit better.
Yeah, I would continue that direction.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Very interesting, because no one really taught us this. We just figured it out. So I'm sure for people listening, they all have different strategies. So we figure it out as we go, right, Ninian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do. We do, Elsa.
So what would you say to the person that's listening to this that may be newly diagnosed and is struggling, or maybe to someone who's had this for a long time and is feeling very discouraged? What would you say to them to encourage them and give them some hope?
Well, this you said newly diagnosed, but let me say something about people who um, don't know yet. And I don't know, they may not be watching this, so if they don't know it, but if somebody is having a lot of difficulty with their voice and can't figure out what it is, then I would suggest that they, contact a major medical facility, in an urban area where, they're not, that's where you're going to find the SD people, the people that know about it. I was lucky I lived near Chapel Hill. I lived near Duke University. But, if you live in a very rural area and you're relying just on your own GP or public health people to try to help you, they just may not have the information.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be something I would say to people is try to find out where are they studying this and treating this, or even if you don't know for sure you have it, still I would say try to go to some place with that's got a speech program, and I mean early on if you can. Yeah, I don't know. I guess what I would say to people is that, um, you know, I'm not an MD and don't want to contradict them, but I'll say I'm certainly glad that I took enough time to see whether I could do this without, um, you know, without Botox. That I think at some point, your brain, the more you do that, you know, try to speak as well as you can and figure out, you know, workarounds, you know, such as, you know, using the word correct instead of the word yes. The word yes takes a lot of effort for me to say, but I can say correct with no problem. So, and I think the more you do that, the less you're conscious of the fact that you're doing it, that you're working on that. You know, you get a bigger and bigger library of workarounds, and I feel as if it eventually gets to the point that you're not conscious of it anymore. But the more you do it, the more every time you speak, you're really practicing. You know, and at first that's very conscious, but then I think it can become almost sort of a subconscious thing, you know, that your brain is you know, adapting all the time. So I guess that's what I would say, you know, at least for people that might want to try it without. Now, I wonder whether Botox might have kept me from getting as good a voice as I have now, actually, because of all the interruption and kind of artificial, you know, manipulation of the vocal cords. I just wonder. I feel like a lot of, mainly I feel like whatever success I have is due to the fact that I practice talking a lot. Does everybody?
And I've heard it both ways. People, and we're lucky, right? We don't have as severe of an SD case.
Yes.
And we're on a spectrum. I know people that have much more severe SD that was affecting their careers, and they had to get the Botox, and the Botox gave them back not only their career, but their self-esteem, and it was a very good thing. So I think, you know, people are really just all over the map with it.
That's right. That's really true. I shouldn't minimize the impact that a very severe case would have on somebody's life.
Absolutely. But, and to your point about not doing the Botox, there's another man in our group, and I wish I remembered his name. He always comes, we do the annual Walkathon at Mary's house, the SD Walkathon. And I want to say he comes from the northern part of the state. You might know him if I could. I think his name is Beall, I want to say. He was in sales. He's retired now. I want to say he might be in his later 60s, early 70s. He decided he wasn't going to get Botox. He was going to switch careers because he was in a very senior level position. But he was in a senior level position where he couldn't communicate. So he's like, okay, I got to get out of this. And he went into sales. And he started to be very successful in sales, thank God. And he decided to retire early, like you. And soon after he retired, his SD went away completely.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. That might be score one for Dr. Morton Cooper, who says it's not a neurological condition.
Well, right? Yeah, I got to find this guy and see if he wants to share his story because.
Yeah, you definitely should. I want to hear a story.
Yeah. And Mary Bavaro, our leader, she knows him, so I'll ask. But I always thought that was so interesting, and I went back to the medical professionals here in Charlotte when I heard this guy's story, and I said, "Hey, do you know of anyone who's been spontaneously cured of SD?" And one of the doctors, she said, "No, that's not possible. I've never heard of that." So who knows, right?
Yeah, who knows? You know, he might have been spontaneously cured. He might have had something else, I guess. I don't know. But I'd like to hear a story. I hope you will track him down.
I will track him down. Yes. Well, Ninian, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing encouragement, and just helping people, because I know when people hear our stories, it just helps us to not feel so alone. So thank you for your time.
Well, and thank you very much for doing this series. I enjoyed the two I listened to so far. How many have you done? Two, or do you want to say how many you've done?
This is my fourth, and
Fourth.
every week I'm trying to record a new one.
Okay.
So
Look
thank
out.
you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.